The corporate executioner did not wear a hood. He wore a wireless headset and a smile that had been focus grouped for maximum deniability. Oliver Finch, the young and aggressively promoted Chief Technology Officer of Apex Commerce, leaned into his webcam with a smug, self-satisfied grin. The Zoom all-hands call was crackling with tension, a digital coliseum where 100 employees sat in stunned silence in their respective home offices. Silas Vance sat perfectly still in his leather chair, his fingers hovering millimeters above his mechanical keyboard. He was a veteran software engineer of 48 years, with silvering hair, a quiet demeanor, and a stoic presence that often made louder men assume he was passive. They were always wrong. Silas had spent the last 5 years of his life carrying the back-end infrastructure of Apex Commerce on his shoulders, single-handedly turning their chaotic legacy codebase into a highly scalable, functional platform. But to Oliver, who had crawled out of some prestigious business school with a pedigree and a lexicon of buzzwords, Silas was just an expensive line item on the engineering balance sheet. Oliver believed that software development was a simple assembly line that could be managed by junior developers working for low wages, completely disregarding the intricate engineering required to keep the systems running. Silas, I am sure we will all sleep much easier knowing you will not be around to sabotage our platform anymore, Oliver said, his voice dripping with condescension. The company messaging channels erupted in real time. Stunned emoji reactions, panicked private messages, and frantic speculation spread like wildfire. Effective immediately, Oliver continued, pretending to read from a script but unable to hide his smirk. Silas Vance is no longer with Apex Commerce. Our legal team has issued a 12-month covenant not to compete, which Silas had agreed to follow when he first joined the firm. We appreciate his past efforts. Silas felt a cold, calm sensation settle over his chest. It was a familiar feeling, the quiet focus that came over him right before a major system outage. The absolute stillness that allowed him to see the bug in the code while everyone else was screaming. He did not yell. He did not object. He did not give Oliver the satisfaction of a reaction. Silas had spent 5 years staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning, resolving database deadlocks and fixing server crashes, while Oliver was skiing in Aspen or networking at tech conferences. Now his access was being stripped in front of the entire company as if he were a common thief. The historical context of Silas's work was vast. He had joined the company when the codebase was a disaster, a fragile tower of poorly written scripts and undocumented database schemas. The previous technical team had built a system that crashed whenever the number of active users exceeded 500. Silas had spent his first year rewriting the core transaction pipeline, implementing a robust caching layer, and designing a database structure that could scale to hundreds of thousands of concurrent transactions. He had sacrificed his weekends, his holidays, and his personal life to ensure that the platform remained stable. During the massive outage on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, while Oliver was offline and unreachable on a yacht, Silas had worked for 14 consecutive hours to restore the database, preventing millions of dollars in lost revenue. He had done all of this without demanding extra compensation or public recognition. He had simply cared about the quality of his work. And now Oliver was painting him as a saboteur in front of the colleagues. He had spent years protecting from system failures. The virtual room remained completely silent, but the tension was palpable. Many of the engineers on the call had worked closely with Silas and knew the extent of his contributions. They knew that without his constant monitoring and optimization, the entire system would quickly degrade. But they were also afraid for their own jobs, knowing that Oliver did not tolerate any dissent or questioning of his authority. Silas watched the faces of his coworkers on the screen. Seeing their shocked and uncomfortable expressions, he realized that trying to argue with Oliver in this forum would be pointless and undignified. Instead, Silas reached forward with a steady hand and clicked the button to leave the meeting. The screen faded to gray. The silence of his small home office was absolute, save for the faint hum of his personal computer. His golden retriever, Barnaby, gave a lazy yawn from the rug. Silas stood up, walked to his bookshelf, and reached behind a row of technical manuals. He pulled out a small steel lockbox. Inside lay a single black USB drive labeled in silver marker. It did not contain proprietary company files. Silas was too smart for that. It contained his own personal creations. Specifically, it held the clean modular code libraries he had developed and registered with the United States Copyright Office years before he ever signed an employment agreement with Apex Commerce. He had integrated those libraries into the company's systems to solve their scaling issues, warning them at the time that he retained the ownership. The company had ignored his warnings, absorbing his intellectual property into their flagship analytics engine. Silas slipped the drive into his pocket. The battle had begun, but Oliver had no idea. He had just walked onto a battlefield. Silas had spent years mapping out. Silas knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But he also knew that he held the key to the company's entire technical infrastructure, and he was prepared to wait for the perfect moment to use it. He would let them celebrate their supposed victory, while the foundations of their digital empire slowly began to rot. The mechanical rejection arrived 3 days later in the form of a cold PDF. Silas sat at his kitchen table, the dim morning light filtering through the blinds as he opened the email from Human Resources. The claim for unemployment benefits had been denied. The reason listed by the Human Resources manager, Linda Miller, was simple and punitive. Termination for cause ineligible for benefits due to willful disregard of leadership directives. Silas let out a quiet, humorless laugh. It was a classic corporate tactic, a final parting blow designed to starve him out and force him into compliance. They wanted him broken, desperate, and compliant so he would never think of challenging the validity of the non-compete agreement they were trying to ram down his throat. But Silas was far from broken. He opened his personal laptop, an older machine with worn keys and a history of late-night refactoring sessions. He saw that his digital identity at Apex Commerce had been completely erased. His name was stripped from the wiki pages he had written. His commit history on the repository was reassigned to a generic administrator account, and his Slack profile was replaced by a gray silhouette. They were trying to pretend he had never existed. But code does not forget, and neither does the law. The next afternoon, Silas walked into the law offices of Reynolds & Partners, situated in a modest brick building on the east side of the city. Henry Croft, a seasoned attorney in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a relaxed, confident demeanor, reviewed Silas's termination packet. Henry spent 15 minutes reading the non-compete clause, grunting occasionally before leaning back in his leather chair. "Silas, this covenant not to compete is absolute overkill," Henry said, tapping the document with his pen. "They are trying to prevent you from working in any capacity within the entire software industry for 12 months. It is written out of sheer terror, but they have made a catastrophic mistake." Silas leaned forward, his voice calm. "What mistake?" Henry smiled, a slow, knowing grin. "California has just passed a major legislative update. Assembly Act 176 and Senate Enactment 699 amending Business and Professions Codes Section 16600. Starting January 1st, all non-compete agreements, regardless of when they were signed, are void and unenforceable in this state. Not only that, but under Section 16600.5, any employer who attempts to enter into or enforce a void non-compete commits a civil violation, allowing the employee to sue for actual damages, injunctive relief, and attorney fees. Henry Croft explained the law in meticulous detail to Silas. Under the newly enacted Section 16600.5, employers are required to send a written notice to all employees who signed a non-compete agreement, informing them that the restrictive covenant is void. This notice must be sent by February 14th of the upcoming year. Oliver and his legal team had completely ignored this requirement, believing that they could intimidate Silas into submission. The new law also allowed for statutory penalties against companies that continued to enforce these illegal restrictions. Silas listened carefully, the pieces of a complex strategy falling into place. He realized that the timing of his firing, although intended to be a sudden execution, was actually his greatest asset. The current date was early autumn. He had to stay clean for only a few months. Henry warned him that he must not violate the non-compete before the law officially took effect. No public freelancing, no competing employment, no paper trail that Oliver's lawyers could weaponize to drag him into court before January 1st. Henry Croft emphasized the importance of absolute discretion. If Oliver's legal team caught wind of any competing activity, they would immediately file for a temporary restraining order, dragging Silas into an expensive and exhausting legal battle before the new protective legislation could shield him. Silas understood the risks perfectly. He knew that corporate attorneys excelled at draining an individual's financial resources through endless depositions and motions. He resolved to remain completely silent. He would not update his professional profiles. He would not speak to recruiters, and he would not engage in any public engineering discussions. "You need to be a ghost, Silas," Henry Croft advised, leaning forward. "Let them think they have won. Let them think you are defeated and looking for a new career outside of tech. If you stay completely silent and do not cross the line, then on January 1st, their leash is legally severed, and that is when we strike them with the full force of the new state legislation." Silas nodded slowly, his mind already shifting to the next phase of the plan. He thanked the attorney, stood up, and left the office. He walked out into the crisp afternoon air, feeling the first real sense of anticipation he had felt since the firing. He would not just wait, he would prepare. He would build his counter-strategy in the dark, away from their trackers, away from their systems, until the trap was ready to spring. He walked back to his car, his thoughts focused on the technology he would build, a system that would render his former employer's platform obsolete. He knew that every line of code he wrote would be a step closer to his freedom, and he felt a profound sense of purpose as he started the engine. Silas deleted his online presence with the methodical care of a programmer wiping a corrupted database. By 3 o'clock in the morning, his LinkedIn profile, personal portfolio, and public GitHub repository had vanished from the internet. In the digital space, Silas Vance was dead. He packed his essentials, loaded Barnaby into the back seat of his sedan, and drove across the state line to a quiet industrial town where he had rented a small, nondescript office space next to an auto repair shop. He set up a limited liability company using a legal alias he had established years ago, Elias Ross, ensuring that his real name never appeared on any public registration documents. He did not seek venture funding or post updates about building in public. He quietly reached out to Toby Jenkins and Colin Jenkins, two brilliant junior developers who were brothers. They had worked under Silas as interns at Apex Commerce and had recently resigned in disgust after Silas was fired. Silas sent them a simple, encrypted message: "I am building something new. Are you in?" Both replied within minutes. The rules of their new workspace were absolute. No real names in the repository metadata, no social media activity, and all development conducted through rotating virtual private networks. Together, they began building a new business-to-business commerce platform from the ground up, codenamed Archon. They did not copy a single line of code from Apex Commerce. Silas knew that copying code was amateurish and legally dangerous. Instead, they built the platform the way it should have been built in the first place. They eliminated the bloated, unnecessary frameworks that Oliver had insisted on using, replacing them with a lean, highly optimized architecture. Where the old company's system sagged under heavy database queries, Archon glided, utilizing a proprietary data structure Silas had designed years ago. Toby Jenkins focused on creating a lightning-fast user interface, while Colin Jenkins rebuilt the API middleware using modern protocols. Silas worked on the core transaction engine, ensuring absolute data integrity and zero latency. They worked long, grueling hours in the cold office, fueled by gas station coffee and the shared desire to prove that engineering excellence always triumphs over corporate theater. By early December, Archon was not just functional. It was outperforming the Apex Commerce platform in every single performance benchmark by over 300%. The office they worked in was drafty and smelled of motor oil from the garage next door, but the atmosphere was electric with creative freedom. Free from the endless, unproductive meetings and bureaucratic oversight of Apex Commerce, the three developers made rapid progress. Silas acted as the architect and mentor, guiding Toby and Colin through complex system designs and teaching them the principles of high-performance back-end engineering. They implemented a distributed database model that eliminated single points of failure, a feature Silas had repeatedly proposed to Oliver only to be dismissed as too expensive. They also integrated advanced cryptographic security protocols, ensuring that user data was protected at every level. Every commit was thoroughly reviewed. Every line of code was optimized for maximum efficiency. They were not just building a product, they were building a masterpiece. The development process was rigorous and intense. They conducted daily code reviews where every implementation detail was questioned and refined. Silas taught the younger engineers how to write memory-efficient algorithms and how to design database schemas that avoided costly table locks. They spent days simulating high-load scenarios, throwing artificial traffic spikes at their test servers to ensure that the platform would remain responsive under the most extreme conditions. They documented their entire development process, keeping meticulous records of their original designs and implementation decisions to prove that their technology was entirely original and independent of any proprietary systems owned by Apex Commerce. They established their local development environment using clean, off-the-shelf hardware and open-source operating systems, leaving no connection to their previous employer's infrastructure. To keep their spirits high during the freezing winter nights, they ordered food from a local 24-hour diner, sharing stories about the chaotic project management at their former company and laughing about Oliver's complete lack of technical understanding. Toby and Colin felt a deep sense of loyalty to Silas, who had always protected them from executive blame and had taken the time to help them grow as engineers. Under his guidance, they were not just writing code. They were learning how to build systems that could withstand any amount of user traffic. The beauty of their strategy was that nobody saw them coming. They created a simple, minimalist landing page for Archon that featured nothing but a sleek, dark background and a single sentence. "We believe software should work." There were no employee bios, no pricing tiers, and no contact numbers, only a secure sign-up form for early access. To the casual observer, it was just another mysterious tech startup. But to the engineering leads still struggling at Apex Commerce, the release of the landing page sent a subtle, chilling shockwave through their private communication channels. The underlying technology behind the landing page was recognizable to anyone who knew Silas's clean coding style. A few senior developers at his old company began to whisper among themselves, wondering if the ghost of Silas Vance had returned to haunt them. But Oliver remained oblivious, too busy pitching investors for a Series C funding round to notice that the foundation of his technical empire was beginning to show deep, irreparable cracks. He continued to boast to the board about how much money he had saved by eliminating Silas's position, completely unaware that he had set a countdown timer on his own career. By the middle of December, the technical debt at Apex Commerce was no longer a quiet warning. It was a screaming emergency. Without Celeste to maintain the fragile back-end infrastructure, the platform began to buckle under the holiday shopping rush. Database connection pools timed out. Data exports failed silently, and scheduled analytics reports arrived as blank documents. Oliver, frantic to maintain the appearance of stability for his impending funding round, ordered the remaining engineering team to hastily patch the legacy modules. But the engineers did not understand the complex, custom-built logic Silas had implemented, and their rushed patches only accelerated the decay. At the height of the crisis, an anonymous, highly detailed technical review was published on a popular developer platform under the pseudonym Chimera Dev. The post, titled "The Emperor Has No Redundancy," was a surgical, dispassionate analysis of the architectural flaws plaguing the Apex Commerce platform. It exposed a critical vulnerability in their core data analytics module, which relied heavily on a pre-employment library that the company had integrated. Without a valid license, the post went viral within hours, circulating through investor chat rooms and causing immediate panic among the board members. The name of the vulnerable internal module, Firebird, was a term known only to internal employees, confirming that the leak came from someone with intimate knowledge of the system. Oliver, desperate to stop the bleeding, tried to call Silas's personal number, only to find it disconnected. He sent desperate emails begging for a consultation, offering massive consulting fees, but received nothing but automated bounce-back messages. Then, on a freezing Tuesday morning, the real blow landed. A courier delivered a formal cease and desist letter to Oliver's office from Reynolds and Partners. The letter did not mention the non-compete. Instead, it cited Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, asserting Silas's exclusive rights to the pre-employment analytics library that Apex Commerce had integrated into their software. The letter demanded that the company immediately cease using, distributing, or licensing any software containing Silas's copyrighted code. Under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, the owner of a copyright has the exclusive rights to reproduce the copyrighted work and to prepare derivative works based upon the copyrighted work. The letter detailed how Apex Commerce had incorporated Silas's pre-employment libraries into their core software without obtaining a license or written permission. It quoted the law directly, warning the company that continued distribution of the software constituted willful infringement, which carried statutory damages of up to $150,000 per infringement, as well as the potential for a federal injunction that would force them to take their servers offline. Oliver read the legal warning with a mounting sense of dread, realizing that his attempt to delete Silas's history had left the company completely vulnerable to a massive copyright claim. The internal chaos at the company was reaching a breaking point. Support representatives were overwhelmed by hundreds of calls from angry clients whose transactions were failing. The engineering team was in a state of near mutiny, tired of being blamed for failures that were the direct result of Oliver's poor technical leadership and neglect of technical debt. Several senior developers quietly updated their resumes and began reaching out to their professional networks, seeking to escape the sinking ship before the public fallout destroyed their own careers. Meanwhile, the legal department was in a state of panic, realizing that they had no valid defense against Silas's copyright claim. The chief executive officer of the company called Oliver into a closed-door meeting, demanding to know why their flagship analytics module was failing. Oliver attempted to downplay the issue, claiming it was a minor database synchronization latency. But the legal department presented the cease and desist letter, shattering his arguments. While his former company was burning, Silas enjoyed a quiet and peaceful life. He spent his afternoons walking Barnaby along the snowy forest paths near his home, breathing in the fresh winter air. He had disconnected his work email, uninstalled all company communication apps, and focused entirely on refining the Archon platform. This quiet isolation allowed Silas to maintain his focus and peace of mind, knowing that the legal strategy Henry Croft had designed was executing perfectly. He did not need to follow their internal Slack panic or read their desperate emails. He knew that the system he had built was a masterpiece, and he was confident that the law would protect his ownership of the technology he had created. The legal packet was airtight, containing original registration certificates from the United States Copyright Office, dating back to 2017, alongside Git history logs proving the code had been written on Silas's personal hardware. Before his employment began, Oliver's head of legal looked at the document and turned pale. Silas had warned them 5 years ago, and they had ignored him. Now the core feature of their platform, the analytics module that justified their multi-million-dollar valuation, was legally toxic. If they did not scrub the code immediately, they faced massive statutory damages and a federal injunction that would shut down their entire platform. But scrubbing the code was impossible. It was so deeply woven into the system that untangling it would require months of downtime and a complete rewrite of the database layer. Oliver sat in his office staring at the cease and desist letter, realizing that the quiet engineer he had fired had just placed a legal detonator at the center of his company's technology. The final confrontation took place on December 19th, in a quiet, wood-paneled courtroom. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and anxiety. Oliver Finch sat at the defense table, his expensive suit looking wrinkled and his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. His lead attorney paced the floor, preparing a desperate argument that Silas was in material breach of his non-compete agreement by developing a rival platform and must be stopped. Silas sat at the plaintiff's table beside Henry Croft, his expression calm and unreadable. When the judge called the hearing to order, Oliver's lawyer stood up, waiving the non-compete contract, claiming that Silas had violated his agreement and was trying to destroy his former employer's business. He demanded an immediate injunction to shut down Silas's new startup, Archon. Henry Croft rose slowly, adjusting his glasses, and stepped toward the bench. He did not raise his voice. He simply presented a copy of the newly amended California Business and Professions Code. "Your Honor," Henry Croft stated, "under California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600, which goes into effect on January 1st, this non-compete agreement is void and unenforceable. Under Section 16,600.5, the defendant's attempt to enforce this unlawful covenant constitutes a civil violation. We are filing a counterclaim for damages and attorney fees." The judge reviewed the statute, nodding slowly. Oliver's lawyer tried to argue that the agreement was signed prior to the law's enactment, but the judge cut him off, noting that the new legislation explicitly applies retroactively to render all such covenants void. The non-compete was dead. Henry then transitioned to the copyright infringement claim, presenting the indisputable evidence of Silas's pre-employment registration under Title 17 of the United States Code. The defense had no counter. They had integrated Silas's copyrighted material without authorization, and they could not run their platform without it. Henry Croft walked the court through the detailed technical logs, explaining the secure hash algorithm signatures that proved Silas had written the code in 2017, years before his employment began. The judge questioned Oliver's legal team, asking if they possessed any signed transfer of copyright or a written license to use Silas's pre-employment libraries. The defense attorney stammered, unable to provide any documentation, and Oliver stared silently at his desk, his face turning red with embarrassment. The judge noted that the company had shown a reckless disregard for intellectual property rights and compliance protocols, and that the copyright infringement was clear and unambiguous. Henry Croft argued that under Title 17, Section 501, Apex Commerce was liable for direct infringement of Silas's exclusive rights. The judge agreed, noting that the evidence of copying was overwhelming and that the company had failed to obtain a proper license. The judge's ruling was swift and devastating. He denied the request for an injunction against Silas and ruled that Apex Commerce was in clear violation of federal copyright law. To avoid an immediate shutdown of their servers, the company was forced to enter into a retroactive licensing agreement. The final settlement was staggering: a 7-figure retroactive payment and a monthly royalty indexed to their transaction volume. This outcome was a complete vindication for Silas, who had watched his hard work be dismissed, and his reputation tarnished by a leadership team that valued corporate politics over engineering integrity. The court's decision was a clear message to the industry that companies could not simply expropriate an engineer's pre-employment intellectual property without consequence. Following the hearing, the board of directors of Apex Commerce held an emergency meeting, voting unanimously to remove Oliver from his position as Chief Technology Officer, citing his gross negligence and failure to manage the company's legal compliance. The Series C funding round collapsed the next day as investors scrambled to withdraw their commitments from a company facing massive legal liabilities and a compromised platform. Within a week, 3 of their largest enter clients migrated their accounts to Archon, attracted by its superior performance and reliability. Silas stood on the balcony of his new office, looking out over the city skyline. Barnaby sat beside him, tail wagging slowly. On his desk lay the old black USB drive, a relic of a past struggle. Silas had not sabotaged the servers, and he had not broken any laws. He had simply used the system's own rules to dismantle the men who thought they were above them. He took a sip of his coffee, feeling the cool winter breeze, knowing that his silence had been the loudest statement of all. He had turned his expertise and patience into an absolute victory, proving that in the end, quality and integrity were the only things that truly mattered. He had built a company where engineers were respected, where the code was clean, and where the rules were followed. Outside the courthouse, Henry Croft had shaken his hand, smiling warmly, and remarked that this was a historic day for tech workers across the state. Silas had simply nodded, knowing that the real work was just beginning, but for the first time in years, it was work he owned completely. He was ready for the next chapter.